Hello, welcome to the global business environment. We can call it a course if it is handled in a classroom. We can call it online revision of what's happening in the world. And we can use it in whatever manner. We can enjoy the stories and we can enjoy the concepts. So, to discuss this course, we have about 30 odd units in it, or rather subsection in it, and we will be handling the first one today. With me is Dr. Kalra, Dean of Management Education and Research Institute. I am Dr. Khurana, and we will be doing it in an interactive fashion.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Khurana. It's an honor and privilege, and I'm happy that we are starting this course today. Very auspicious day we are starting it. Hope it will be liked by the students and it will reverberate in various management institutes. So let us start with the very basic, that is the definition of global business. So according to you, how we define global businesses?
Well, it refers to commercial activities that are involved in the production, distribution, regular things, and the sale of goods across national boundaries.
Yeah.
So if it is across national boundaries, it becomes
global. It becomes global.
And because there are some differences also, the regulations can differ. The laws relating to wages can differ. Labor laws can be different.
Right.
So obviously, more complex management phenomena occur when you go.
Yes. Because while going global, the organizations will have to look at the legal environment, the political environment, and what we call it as macro environment of that particular country, which involves economic, social, technological, legal, political environments. Before entering, that market study is required. So as you rightly mentioned, it makes it more complex. It requires a more cautious strategy and a better strategy to enter to the global market. And we can say that there are different modes of entry into global market. The very simple way could be just starting in a way of FIIs, then FDIs. FIIs like franchisee model or simply transferring your licenses, or it could and getting royalty on a regular basis. It could be a more complex, as you mentioned, like FDI model, whereby we start our venture there, or it could be simply an export business also to start with.
So to add a little bit to it, global business encompasses a very wide range of activities.
Yeah.
That includes international trade. So it's not just marketing. It is foreign direct investment.
Right.
It is operations of multinational enterprises. Because again, laws come into it. And recent example of Mr. Trump, the president of USA, creating policy structure so that more manufacturing comes to USA. And so we can, at the minimum, make a distinction between national business and international business. So inter goes across.
Right.
However, if it sets up all the operations of manufacturing, production, distribution, and so on, and goes to more than two countries, then we start calling it a multinational.
Multinational.
And that's where we have to figure out if they are in Bangkok, they are in Manila, they are in Tokyo, they are in Delhi. How will they manage those things? And look at the reverse also. Maruti Suzuki, its operations in India are substantially different from Suzuki in Japan.
Japan.
Yeah.
Right.
The spare parts will be the same, the components will be the same, but the culture with which they work is going to be different. So,
yeah, when it comes to understanding the international markets have an impact in terms of political, economic, even cultural influences these international organizations or businesses bring to any country. We have witnessed a lot of such examples. Before we talk further, let us first understand the historical evolution of these international organizations.
Yeah.
So in terms of historical evolution, the first phase started in the 16th or the 16th to 18th century, whereby there was a lot of colonism and emergence of international trade started from there. Then 19th and 20th century saw the emergence of multinational corporations, whereby the organizations move out of their boundaries and establish their units in different countries. They were not only taking care of the marketing part, they were taking care of the operations, HR, all those aspects of management. And then came the late 20th, whereby the rise of globalization took place and we started talking about global village, making world as a global village. And current phase is different, where we are talking about deglobalization again, that the countries or the organizations are concentrating themselves in their own territories only. The recent cases of America or the EU, where they want to take the steps back and they want to concentrate their businesses in their own countries only. So it's a business cycle. We say everything boom and then recession. So I may say that now the world has started moving towards the recession of globalization, which is deglobalization.
So just to add a few points to what you've said, you've explained it very well and divided it into relevant periods. We had in 16th to 18th century East India Company,
Right.
Dutch East India Company. We had the Hudson Bay Company, which was of the Britishers but in Canada. And later on, many of them became real estate companies also. And I'm not mentioning the ones in Hong Kong, Singapore, and so on and so forth. And they came as trading houses, and then they become investors. Jardine, second name I'm forgetting, but Jardine, something in Singapore is still the largest trading company. Okay, then as the colonialism retreated, they became corporations like any other. Some of them became multinational corporations. For some, it was the end of their life cycle. Contemporary phase is where you have excess capacity to yourself. This happens primarily in Japan, America, and European countries, some of them like Germany. And you therefore have capacity more than what you are consuming in the marketplace of your own. So you try and start going outside and so on. And then you realize that you have more profits outside. The product life cycle is today such that the home operations for them are not making much money. Now this globalization was where under the GATT and other things, you say that we should have one market, we are open market, we are one world, we are no boundaries, no tariffs, etc. Now having done it, it seems the Asian companies for the first time have given the let's say very, very strong competition. And Japan first, Korea and China, and now coming to Vietnam and so on. The Asian companies and countries are giving very, very tough time. So, well, they have started conceptualizing that let's do deglobalization.
Right.
And also it is in the context that the modern industries, like telecom, like computers, like AI now, the modern industries are footloose. They can go anywhere. They can operate from any corner of the country, practically, as long as the infrastructure is concerned. And they can conduct 95% of their operations from there. So you don't have to be physically present now anymore in the other countries to be a global corporation.
Yeah, when this phase of globalization started, the countries, initially there were bilateral agreements going on between the countries to start a business in another country and so on. But of late, the countries felt that there has to be one common organization controlling these multilateral agreements also. Like if I am a company in India and I want to trade with Germany, I want to trade with France, I want to trade with US, UK, then these multilateral agreements should be controlled by one single organization. There should be common rules, regulations for these multilateral agreements, which gave birth to an organization named GATT. That is General Agreement for Trade and Tariff. And then in 1995, GATT was converted to WTO. And world today is following the rules of WTO whenever there are multilateral agreements and whenever they trade among each other. And that was one part. But parallelly, there were other regional integrations which were going on, like NAFTA or EU. The first regional integration, I would say, was EU, then came NAFTA. And after the success of NAFTA, the GATT and WTO came into picture. But EU and NAFTA were concentrated in one region, so that's why they were known as regional integrations. But because we were talking of a global village, so there was a requirement for global integrations also, which resulted into GATT and finally to WTO, which we are following today. And most of the countries are member and they are accepting the rules of trade, tariff of WTO. So that's how this globalization has picked up the pace, and organizations around the world have started business in different parts of the world.
Very good. Let me add just few things to it, and to the end come that from globalization, why then this phenomenon of deglobalization is coming? The General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade also did a lot of technical work of matching the specifications. Otherwise, if it was 110 volt in one country like USA and 220 volt elsewhere, none of the electrical equipment will match. So you say 220 volt or you have conversion mechanism. Like that, the various standards in cars, the various standards in any moving part, in switches and so on.
Right.
Lately, Europe has started developing their own under the umbrella of EU. So that was having been done, there was a period, therefore, in the 90s, when the Soviet Union had started to dismantle itself. It did dismantle itself in 1991. So that is the time when US and Europe became very strong to say that everything should be under their control. So they got rid of the GATT and set up WTO, completely controlled by them. Their specifications,
the General
their
Assembly
people,
controlled by them.
Controlled by them.
Yes.
And conceptualized that, the free trade is a very good idea. Everybody should have free trade and everybody should have no wall, no trade.
Yes. Because the general philosophy behind WTO was that if every country grows, then only developed nation grows further. That was the philosophy they worked with, and they established the journal.
And so, as you have rightly said, then we had the regional associations, NAFTA, and then you can say Mercosur, which is in Latin America, and then ASEAN.
ASEAN, yes.
And ASEAN is 10 countries.
Even SAFTA.
Even SAFTA. SAARC also you can consider, but
SAARC finally
it did not emerge as
yes.
a proper trade union, trade body. So then the NAFTA also was withdrawn because it became too successful. Now, how successful it is that 2 days before, the figures have come from the US that Canada has surplus of $300 billion per year.
Okay.
And, sorry, the other way around, 200 and 300 Mexico. Two of them $500 billion, right? So which means in 10 years it will be 5 trillion.
5 trillion.
Yeah. So that is the capital they would have, which the Americans owe them. Now this is the great worry. So they broke up NAFTA. And you know that how many items have now tariffs and trade barriers, right? Steel and aluminum and electricity, and, lumber and what have you. And then there is on top of it a tariff of 20%.
20%.
Yeah, 20%,
yes.
Right. On the other hand, European Union has been gelling. A lot of advantages. I mean, they started at the steel and coal community. And from there they grew to other items and then a little bit of political thing, but otherwise they are separate countries. They're not like United States of Europe. And they have done another thing, that developed very tough standards for climate. And they have figured out a way of minting money out of countries which don't have sufficient carbon emission.
Uh, that's the another part we'll
Okay, fine.
discuss in the
Let's
climatic
okay.
aspect.
Okay, fine.
Let us now.
Fine. So now let's go to what are the key drivers of globalization.
Yes.
So we started talking about deglobalization. Go ahead.
So key drivers, let us talk about the key drivers of globalization. One key driver is technology. Yes. Whenever the globalization takes place, there are advances in information and communication technologies, and it is because of the advancements in ICTs which has led to globalization. It is the advancements in digital platforms, e-commerce site, which has made globalization more vibrant, or I would say easier to pick up a pace. Then there are trade policies because of the reduction in tariffs, because of the different trade policies and free trade areas. Like you just now mentioned about NAFTA, EU, all these have contributed to globalization because there was a free movement of labors, free movement of resources, and which made it easier for the organizations to set up their business across their boundaries. So that is then transportation. Yes, the transportation facilities have improved. The road, railway, sea connects have improved over the years, which has further strengthened or with the supply chain, resulting into globalization. And the communications, as you mentioned, that the telecommunication organizations can operate from anywhere in the world by sitting in one country only. So that is the advancements.
And the communications help the logistics also.
Logistics also. Yes.
Everybody's kind of instantly connected.
So all this together has contributed to the growth of globalization and making world a global village. That's why today, sitting in India, we can afford the products which were earlier a dream for our parents or grandparents, but now just with a click of a button, we can have afford those. We can avail the facilities of those products, or we can avail those products, I would say it like that. And it is the result of globalization only. And this all is possible because technology is better, communication is better, transportation is better, and trade barriers or trade policies have contributed to it.
So, fair enough, we can touch upon the next subject. We can talk about multinational enterprises and their characteristics,
Right.
their strategies, and market entry
Modes.
So, definition is fairly simple. They operate across a number of countries.
Right.
They have a significant international presence. And here we remember that Ford Motor Company in the USA at one point of time operated in 100 countries and became a multinational in 1904.
Right.
So that early. The Zaibutsu, the big houses of Japan, Mitsubishi and Mitsui, have been multinational for 200 odd years, maybe more. Right? Now in the current era, companies like Samsung, UI, Siemens,
LG.
of course, LG, they have become multinational.
Multinationals, right.
So what are the characteristics? They're typically large, complex organizations. They have something, special technology or marketing or positioning in the marketplace with which they can take the product to different places. Then the issue is whether you adapt or you don't adapt. On a very simple level, it's McDonald's. Whether you adapt the hamburger, which is made with beef in the US, to something else in India. They decided to adapt it. Other places they had resisted that their formula will only do, but in India they did that. So yes, they may have the same arch, they may have the same marketing campaigns.
Yes, the golden arch of MACD.
McDonald's. And see, when I was a student in the US, and we saw this McDonald's thing, it just started growing. So we wondered that, how come a hamburger can become multinational product? Why can't the local guy make hamburger
Right.
or pizza? That it doesn't have to come from Italy to be served here. But be that as it may, because it's maybe because of quality standards, maybe because of taste, maybe because of positioning.
There's a lot of contribution of that operations, I would say, the product line, the process layout they came up with, that they were able to deliver right on time. And they were the first to introduce the concept of self-delivery in India.
That's right. That's right.
That's how, but yes, as you rightly mentioned, it depends upon MNEs or MNCs that whether they want to adapt as per the culture or they don't want to adapt. At times, the cultural factors force you to adapt.
See, basically, therefore, what it comes to is, whether it's a technical product, it's a TV or it's a hamburger or a pizza, you have to develop a process, and it's the process which delivers the quality.
Right.
Not having a quality department and
Right,
no,
right.
everybody is contributed to quality, right? So once you have the process, the quality will get delivered. This is the basic thing,
Exactly.
and that is what will make you a multinational,
Right.
because that process will
Process, your SOPs, I would say, your processes, your policies, all that contribute to become help you to become a multinational organization. And we were talking about that whether they want to adapt or not here. I remember one case that in Spain, the word Pepsi, when it was written, in their language, the meaning came out to be something else. So they added extra P in their name, so that it could be considered as a beverage to be drinked.
And copyrighted
Copyrighted it. So that's how it depends.
Sometimes these names are very...
Yes, yes.
Okay, now if we basically talk about strategies, they can follow globalization, they can follow localization, that means they can become local.
Global.
You are global enterprise, but then you adapt to the local environment. And then transnational strategies. Now, purely technical equipment can afford to have transnational strategies. That means Siemens switch will be Siemens switch, transnational switch will be transnational switch.
Huawei will be,
telecom
yes,
equipment will be same anywhere else. Similar with computers. So they have been able to, even in computers, control the quality such that everybody goes by the brand. That's why it become brand driven. Including software has become brand driven because you can't see anything.
Right.
Then you can talk about market entry modes. That is exporting, licensing your product,
Yes,
franchising your product, joint venture, and wholly owned subsidiaries.
wholly owned subsidiaries.
So that way, conceptually, they are quite simple. It's only by taking more case studies in each one of them. There are many companies who have gone this total route, first starting to export, and
Yes.
then licensing it,
Yes, yes.
and so on. And this is where, again, what Mr. Trump is saying, that Japanese, you have been operating here for quite some time. Chinese, you also have been operating. Germans, you have been operating. So you know about your market, right? That 500,000 Japanese cars are sold, or 1 million Japanese cars are sold, considering all the brands, because Toyota has the highest actually. So why don't you set up the factory here, right? So in the beginning they license, then they start opening their own, not their own, their own, or they tie up with somebody to open the showrooms, and then they start bringing the components, just like Suzuki did in India. So you assemble with those components. The next stage is you start making, you start assembling the cars itself and make your own components, right?
Right.
So like Suzuki has come up to that stage, and then they start exporting from here. It's kind of, it's an Indian product, because the value addition is Indian, and Japanese design, etc. But if the president of a country says, you are not making enough cars here, right? And I'm going to create a trade policy or industrial policy that you will have to. So, if you bring your cars, I'm going to levy 20% on you. And in India, we have been using this strategy for very long, that we put lower duty on components and higher
duty on the final goods.
Final products, right? So that at least components are brought in. So different strategies are tried by companies on one hand and the policy
government.
makers on the other. So we can look at their impacts.
Definitely these MNEs or MNCs bring a lot of jobs to the country they enter into. We can witness it in our own country, India, where Hyundai has brought a lot of jobs. Then there are a lot of power organizations which entered India with 100% FDI. They brought jobs. they always bring jobs. So there is a creation of job once the MNCs enter. There is technology transfer. Yes, you are able to have an access on the technology which was not present earlier in that particular country. Like Suzuki has trained Indian market. Then we can also see Honda has trained Hero Group. So that technology transfer is there. There is a competition in the market, a competition to produce a quality product, to bring down the prices also, which is better for the customer point of view also. So market which earlier used to be a monopoly by the local players tends to become an oligopoly market, or more of a monopolistic market with the entry of these MNCs. So that's how it is a win-win situation for the country they belong to, and it is because there are they take back their repartition of profits also take place. So it's a win-win situation for the country they belong to. It's a win-win situation where they enter. Means there is a positive economic impact whenever an MNCs enter as a wholly owned subsidy to that particular country.
So I think this is quite clear that broadly we are talking about job creation and employment, and this is not an empty dream. It does happen.
Yes.
Technology transfer is there, because without that those things will not operate. So either the technicians from outside or the local person will be trained, and then constantly trained and upgraded. And then it does increase competition.
Yes.
And the market structure changes because of that. Actually, this Suzuki Maruti example is a very good one to show this. You know that there was a company which was set up by Indira Gandhi's son, Sanjay Gandhi, and he tried to make his own small car, small car project. Well, it did not succeed finally, right? So this company, after his death, had to survive, Maruti, and it his name. A lot of people were interested that that small car is made in India because the bigger ones were not affordable. And so finally they looked at Japanese companies and come to the conclusion that Suzuki is the good one. Now, today, Indian Maruti Suzuki makes multiples of cars of what they do in Japan. Because their market shifted from small cars to medium-sized cars.
Right.
Okay. Now, second advantage, Hyundai has a very good market share. Toyota has the maximum, right? So maximum market share is Japanese company. Second largest is Korean company. And then comes General Motors and Ford.
Yeah.
Okay, now, the point is that because of this policy again, they asked Hyundai, either you have 20% tariff, or you set up a factory here. I already have one. Set up another one. You are selling 1 million cars. The other factory is just making 500,000. Why are you bringing 500,000? If you are, then I'm going to charge you higher tariff.
Yeah.
Okay, now the interesting thing comes. Hyundai said, Mr. President, if you get a picture of mine taken in your Oval Office, I'll invest $200 billion on the agreement right there and then. What is the agreement? Agreement is to set up a 1 million car project. Second, more important, is to set up a plant to make robots. So now you are going to get land relatively free. You're going to get water, you're going to get electricity, because it has become a special national project. And if we would have come just for robots, otherwise, they would have set regulation, this, that, so on and so forth, right? Okay, so
that reminds me two very good examples. Because one, you mentioned earlier that it is your processes which makes you MNCs. Now, you mentioned the name of Hyundai. Yes, it was way back when General Motors was facing a problem, and General Motors profits were declining. They just did a survey that why we being the nationals of US not able to have the profits like the Japanese firm, these Hyundai and all. So when they did a survey, they found that for a process whereby the 4 workers were doing one job in General Motors, it was only one worker which was doing a job in Japanese firm.
Per hour rate was also higher.
Yes. because of which then General Motors realized that their cost structures are much, much higher than the Hyundai, and then they retrenched a large chunk of employees in one go just to cut down that and bring the profits back. So that is an example which justifies your statement that it's your operations, it's your processes, thank you, which makes you multinational and which makes you more profitable. Then you mentioned about that Hyundai talking to US President that a national project of robotics. There is a similar case study of MACD, that is McDonald's, when they entered Russia. At that time, Russia, USSR, was a socialistic economy. When they entered there, in that year, they required that wheat flour for their buns. But the government of Russia said, sorry, I can't give you the wheat flour because you are not the part of my quota this year. And McDonald's very well knew it that they'll have to import the lettuce leaf from US. And the cost of that lettuce leaf was already high. And then the cost of that wheat flour also increased. So overall, McD burger became a costly affair in Russia. But the next year, they tied up with the government in the same manner, and they said that we will train your farmers that how to yield, how to grow or do the farming of lettuce leaf. In return, you give us the wheat flour, the part of the quota of your wheat flour. So that's how they lettuce leaf export import was no more there because the farmers were trained, and they got the wheat flour also, and the cost came down. And then finally came a situation when in Russia they had the biggest store. The MACD had the biggest store, and now they are conducting the carnivals also. So whenever you are going outside your boundaries, you'll have to think this strategically. Only then you can have profits and you can win the market.
Okay, I think that illustrates it quite well. So let's look at the next thing, is cultural influences.